Welcome to day two. So this is day two of me basically using Claude and working on my MMO game. I got up early this morning. I had some doctor's appointments I had to go to, but I decided to get some quick refactors in, and uh, I'm actually kind of watching this back. I don't actually remember all the stuff that I did, so I'm going to comment as we go along on what was actually being done. I think we had some stuff left over. I guess let's see. Yes, we ended last time by we were doing the sort of working on the inventory system. Now we're going to start working a little bit more like the attribute system and the eventually we're going to introduce the mob system and stuff like that. And so here's kind of a thing about software engineering. So I have kind of a plan, but I don't really have a plan. So I don't really know what I'm doing. I have never actually made this kind of game, or really I've made small kind of gameish things over the last 15 years or so, but I don't really know what I'm doing. So a lot of what is going on sometimes is that I'm kind of making a holding pattern where I'm just doing a little code that I kind of I know has to exist. Things I know that kind of have to be done. They get a few steps closer to the final form, and I have some ideas about the final form, but I don't know for a fact what the final form is going to be. So there's a lot of that on this today, and also I just didn't have a whole lot of time. So the first session I think was only 30 minutes because I ended up having to leave to go to my doctor's appointment. And so here, let's see. Um, oh yeah. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to do is to make this sort of generalized game result instead of inventory result, right? And so we're going to kind of do that refactor because I started working on the inventory system. Well, I started working on the items and inventory system for a lot of reasons. Most of the time when people start making a game, the first thing they do is they want to get a mesh in a 3D world that runs around and has controls attached to it, right? That's how everybody starts the games. And then they kind of build up from there. And then when they try to make their game sort of like an MMO style game, when you work from that way, when you try to go from this sort of it works on my machine, everything's just my machine, into this other stuff, and you try to add these other things on, they end up sort of really feeling inorganic and not really part of the system. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to eschew that because for two reasons. One is that I'm not remotely good at 3D programming or modeling. So I'm kind of learning a little bit about that and figuring what I might do for the actual art asset aspect. And the other thing is when I play games, modern games, I find the inventory system, item system, and crafting systems to not actually always be that great. Sometimes they're great, but sometimes they're not. But they all kind of have sort of what I would consider to be user experience problems. And one of those problems kind of stems from their basically they have an aesthetic for the game. And the aesthetic is all about what the artist or the game designer wants the user to feel in a purely sort of visual auditory sense. They don't really seem to think about how a user who's doing something multiple times, every day, playing their game for hundreds or even thousands of hours, how they feel about the system. And so they often design things that are really impressive when you're a brand new player, right? And it's the first time engaging with them, and they seem impressive and immersive, and that's great. But once you stick around for a while, you really get tired of all the sort of lack of what they call quality of life features. For the inventory system, market system, how you handle items, how you can inspect item attributes and stuff like that. So I decided I was going to kind of start in that area because for a couple of reasons. One, it's definitely doable code for me 100%. I can do that code. Um, when I did work in game programming in 2009, I kind of worked on this auction system. So that's like where my experience lies. Not with like the 3D programming stuff like that, but with, sort of like these sort of auction systems. So like inventory management, I once, spent a long time working on like a point of sale system. So like inventory management and item management and stuff like that, I kind of actually know how to do that. So even though I don't necessarily know how the game's going to be, I have some pretty good ideas about how the inventory system's going to be. And I have some pretty good ideas about how we're going to make that distributed, how we're going to make it sort of like fault tolerant, how we're going to do like from a systems architecture perspective. Ultimately, I have ideas about how we're going to do that. So that's another reason why I kind of started here. It's like it's something I know, it's something I can kind of do to build up a little bit of momentum. Um, so here, yeah, we just kind of like renamed this result, and I'm basically like giving Claude, just go ahead and do it. Having him sort of fix some stuff about these error codes, because now we could like have lots of different game error types. We could have like an error type for each one, and if I was coding in Rust, like in Rust, you kind of like every library, like sort of like the parent binary generally has uses like anyhow errors, but libraries use this error, and each library is supposed to like have their own error types as an enum, and then you're just supposed to like be able to map back and forth in between them. And there's definitely some rationality behind that. It's actually kind of good. Generally, if I'm writing Rust, I kind of want to do it that way. But in this particular case, I think it'll probably be okay if we just have one type of error struct or error result, and that we just kind of like use that universally. And then we just sort of like prefix the codes with like INV underscores for inventory errors, and sort of like maybe market will be like MKT or something like that as like a prefix, and it will be, yeah, a big large file, and that can be like a shit show sometimes, but um, having a gigantic enum is not as bad as you think, because it becomes a kind of poor man's database. And when you have like that, and then you have like a sort of a thrift struct with like the mapping, it's like a database in a certain sense. It's a static database that doesn't change very often. And you have to remember, like, when you're storing data, like you have to ask yourself, like, how often is this data going to change? How often is it going to be read? How often is it going to be written? And that can kind of inform, like, well, then how do you really need to do it? I mean, like, do you really need to go through the hullabaloo of making like a highly available, scalable database with multiple read replicas and replication, if you're talking about static data that's like read once when the client starts up for each client that's a user, and maybe you have like 1,000 users, so you get like 1,000 reads when 1,000 clients starts up. It's not worth it. Like, you can just make a big file, and the file might be like 1 kilobyte, 2 kilobytes, 3 kilobytes. It's really efficient. You might be able to like embed it in the binary, or you might be able to like send it down the wire, or any of that stuff. So having a big enum, not necessarily a bad thing. Big having a big hash map that's like a static hash map, a const hash map in Thrift, that's actually kind of like a good way for you to store some data, because you can load that directly up into your binary, and it's kind of quasi efficient. I mean, like, efficiency is on a sliding scale. So we're not necessarily thinking that we're going to be super efficient by using Thrift, but we're not going to be super inefficient. Like, it's not inefficient. It's not really bad in the grand scheme of things. And sorry about you hearing me drinking my drink here, but I'm basically sitting back watching this video. You're like, what the hell did I do today? Because this is like 10 hours ago. So I have no idea like what I even was doing half the time. I really have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I should make that like totally clear. Like, I have no idea. Huh. And I'm probably being a little bit anal retentive about the committing, but sometimes it's really good for you to go like step by step, and so you can kind of like see the evolution here. And also part of it is like I'm really evaluating the degree to which Claude is like useful. And so I kind of want to be able to look back across history and see like the evolution of like the changes I can make with Claude. Um, uh, let's see here. We are basically renaming this item attribute. So like, again, because we started with the items, Like we created this whole sort of like, I guess you could call it like a framework for working with like items and attributes. And if you look at it, it actually seems like kind of dumb right now. But if you understand like how it's probably going to be used in the future, um, it's done this way. So one, we don't have to change the schema as often, right? Like by adding new attributes. Now, it might have been the right thing to do to make them member variables on the structs, but instead we kind of made them as this separate thing. And kind of here's the reason. Like there's a reason behind this. So we have like a platonic concept of an item or an object or even like an NPC or whatever it is. And that's the kind of the template of the item in its base state with maybe some default values attached to it. But we need to know like some things about the item and what kind of attributes it supports. And that's going to have to be stored somewhere, you know. It may be a little bit in a database, but it would be like a static database, or we can store it in like a file or whatever. However, anytime when we go through to like generate stuff for the world, like the content for the world, um, we're gonna be generating sort of different levels of dynamic items. Um, and so those items, when they're materialized into the world, they have a much more limited existence. Like before, we referred to the items as platonic items. That's like this philosophy of like there's this special universe where items come from, which is like the model of the perfect item. And then when we sort of like materialize them into the universe, we basically copy them from that storage, that template, into another table that is the manifestation of that item in the game world, right? And once it's manifested inside the game world, any one of these items, objects, players, whatever, those attributes could change. They could change temporarily. Like, say, for instance, if you have attributes on a player, that player could, for instance, um, could for instance like have to swallow a potion that causes them to have stronger attributes or something like that, or that player could have an item and they could have special skills that allow them to like sharpen the item, which either gives a temporary or a permanent buff to some attribute. So those attributes have to be manifested into the game with a different backing, because while they start one way, they could be manipulated and change over time. So they're going to have to be kind of stored separately um, from the actual item. Because otherwise, like, how else are you going to store these items? Because what's really changing, the data that's changing, is the attribute value. It's nothing to do with the item. So if all those things, and also like when you have sort of like 1,000 different items that could have like 10 different types of attributes and 10 different combinations, like you actually get a problem storing them in the same sort of database table. So we kind of have to store them both. The platonics have to be stored in this sort of backing table, but also the materialized versions have to be stored in this new table, right? And then there's also like later on we'll kind of get into it where like maybe the attributes for NPCs are stored in one table and also could be a different database. That's one thing that we want to basically keep flexible, is that for like really hot tables, maybe we want to move those into a new database and have that only serve that particular information, right? So we're gonna like work on that, but that's not like a system that you can just like plop out of your head. Like it'll just be that way. We kind of have to get there iteratively. And like here, I'm just using it to refactor my tests to make an inventory test file. That's pretty cool. Like that's definitely a useful thing to do. We want to do some testing. We want to do a limited amount of testing. We want to get to a point where we can start doing some more like integration-y testing a little bit. But one thing that we're kind of going to find is, Claude is kind of good, not too bad, not too great at writing unit tests. We probably need to work on that a little bit. And like while I'm doing this stuff, I'm also learning a little bit more about like how are we going to like communicate with Claude? How are we going to give Claude, the extra information that he needs to do his job, basically. All right, so we're kind of getting to the end of this testing refactor, which is pretty cool. Now we're done. We've moved all of these sort of functions over to the file. Let's kind of take a look at what he's done. And like he's done like a pretty good job. Like he's moved all these things over. Not super happy about that sort of transitive import up at the top, where you see where it's like it ends up working simply because we import star from the previous one, and that one imports star from the game types. So we end up getting inventory like these types are actually imported by this sort of transitive import via the import star. And I don't know how unhappy I am about that. Like I use game.ttypes import star. Probably should have done one by one, but I mean, it's just right now it's kind of test and boilerplate code. I'm not going to really fiddle over those small little things. For the most part, like the code is looking good. Looking not absolutely trash. And also seems to work still, so we're happy with that. All right, so we're back. So this is like the evening session. This is after I got back from my appointment with the doctor, and now we're going to start working on a very very loose idea of mobs or NPCs. And I use mob because I'm old school, and back in the days we used to play like these text games like Muds and stuff, and the NPCs were not called NPCs; they were called mobs because they were mobile. So so here we're gonna create this sort of mobile um, file, and we're not gonna do too much with it right now. We're gonna work it a little bit in, but again, like this is it's gonna be a central concept for the game, so it's gonna take like a really long time to actually get it ironed out. So ultimately, we sort of get a good prompt, and we run it, and for what we're trying to do, like, does this attribute belong to a mobile? The code looks fine. One of the things that eventually I'm going to start sort of complaining to Claude about, which is that this very involved documentation for like a function that is really obvious. And so at some point I'm going to work on making a claude.md file so that he won't do some of these things. I can tell him like, look, if it's small obvious functions, you don't need to comment about them because they're just another maintenance burden for you. At this point we're gonna start working on this function to basically get the attributes from mobile. So I mean, here's the thing about attributes, especially when you have attributes like position and so on and so forth. Like the way that the thrift file is kind of being designed, it allows for like a multi-paradigm expression of what a player or a mobile or an item would be. But object oriented programming is kind of trash and not very efficient. And so while it can kind of be mildly useful, not real object orientation, but kind of like the syntactic way of expressing things in OOP can sometimes be useful if you are used to it. Like I'm not necessarily saying you have to like get used to it, but because it's such a common idiom in software engineering, like it can be kind of useful. So we want that for some of our code. We want to be able to like switch into an object-oriented syntactic sugar mode where we sort of represent um, uh, some sort of large object of information about a player or an object or whatever it is. But when you're actually going to make like really fast code, what you kind of want is you want all the things that you're going to operate on to be in a line, like say for instance an array, and that you just sort of iterate over them and you do all the necessary transformations that you need for like position or rotation or whatever it's going to be in the future. And you might want to do that with large groupings of objects, and you might want to You might want to be able to sort of like make sublists and views into them and all kinds of different things. So the way that we're doing these attributes, they can actually be represented both ways. We can do it in this very procedural, large data-oriented programming kind of way where we're going to do like single operation across many things. Because remember, like the single case, single case is the degenerate case. Generally speaking, it's like actually like when you start making a piece of software, uh, the single case is easier for you to think about when you start out, and that's what you're working with. But the ultimate goal of the software is not to do one thing to one player at one time, right? It's to do a lot of things to a lot of players, a lot of items, a lot of attributes, a lot of NPCs in a very fast time. Like it's so the real final use case of any kind of like system like what we're designing here is definitely not the object oriented, solipsistic way of looking at things. But we want to kind of have both. We want to have our cake and eat it too for the moment and then see how that works out. And it could be that, and from like, if that doesn't really work out, if that ends up actually being a problem, then we can switch to like a more data oriented design way of doing things. But for now, we're kind of like, I wouldn't say we're getting the best of both worlds because actually still it's kind of janky. Again, it's like very very early in the sort of process, but it is kind of it's kind of okay. Like it's not making me unhappy yet. At any point, it could start making me unhappy, and then we'll have to change it as soon as possible. So here we kind of have some interesting things, right? So you'll notice up there at the top of the screen the code where us like line 33 or line 34, I think, where it's like if attribute owner is not none and attribute owner mobility is not none and blah blah blah, right? This is a complex predicate in an if statement. You can kind of get away with it. This is actually not horribly bad. Claude has kind of made this nice-ish looking. But, these things can get out of hands. And so I'm just basically saying, like, hey, why don't you just lift that out of the if statement, make it a variable so it's like easy to work with, and then just do if on the variable. And that's kind of like a little style thing. That's like a peccadillo for me. Is it the right way to do it? I don't know. But I feel like it's kind of ultimately a little bit better. In this particular case because like the problem is like any kind of like degenerate piece of code you put in it's just going to degenerate further. So like whatever thing that you do that's like janky, just imagine that there's going to be an increased amount of jank going forward. So this is the part where we start making our, what we like to call it, database adapter. We're going to do it in like little stages and steps, and it's going to get increasingly hairy as we go. This is one of those things where it is going to be a non-trivial kind of components in the system, and we're basically going to be using it to like create the database and seed fixture data in the database for testing runs. And then also, like, we're probably going to use the adapter in some code for basically like doing world generation. And then we also might end up using the adapter to actually ultimately load stuff from the database during sort of like more robust testing. Again, like we're doing all this in Python for now, but we might be doing it in Rust or C++ or C or whatever later on or Go. Who knows? Like what we actually end up choosing for any particular component. Um, there are definite merits to doing everything in one language when it comes to manageability. But there are definite problems in the flexibility of what you can do and how easy it is to do stuff because some things are just easier in some other types of software. Um, some things like performance critical, some things are safety critical, some things are concurrency critical, and some things are just like not really all that critical. And to be honest, you can just probably get away with doing them in like something like Python or whatever. Um, the problem is actually when you try to get away from being polyglot and then you choose wrong. So you choose a language that is good at one thing but not good at all the other things in your system. Well, then you end up getting kind of screwed. And ultimately, like all projects become polyglot because of this fundamental truth that best tool for the job. And different languages are good at different things. And if you stay only in the desktop space, you can just use C sharp if you're doing Windows, or you can just use C++. But once you start getting out into the server and sort of large system architectures, distributed system architectures, you're just going to be working with multiple languages, multiple types of implementations of stuff. You're going to be using some Java, you're going to be some Go, you're going to be using possibly Rust or C++ or Python or PHP or Ruby or whatever it is. And ultimately, it kind of doesn't matter because, like, when you're building a game, people so underestimate what goes into making a game because you're not just making a game. Like when I worked in 2009 in sort of game programming for a very limited amount of time, did not get much experience with it, but I did do a little bit. And the guy I was working with, he had worked on Neopets, and like the first thing he told me is like, when you build a game, the first thing you make is the admin control panel, and the first button that you make is giving a player back an item they lost, right? And he just said because like that's what managing a game is. It's just constantly people from a bug, from some accident or whatever it is, they lose an item, and his philosophy was, I'd rather keep the player than them not have the item. Like it's not a big deal. Of course, he was making games. Games were kind of like very appealing towards more the kid side, so probably like restoring lost items was a lot more important to a kid than it is to an adult. Maybe if you have a game where there's real loss in the game, that's part of what it is, and that's part of what's supposed to make it fun, then you don't want to just give any item back. But I still believe that you lose a lot of goodwill and you just generate a lot of animosity when people lose items to bugs. You should have a way to restore it. So that's what he basically said is like the first thing you build is the admin control panel on the back end, and the first button you make is the one that restores players' items. And he kind of meant that as like a saying because obviously you have to build like an audit system. And even when we were like designing the database, it was all like, okay, how do we track what happened? How do we know what happened at this point? Somebody says they lost an item. Did they ever actually own the item? We can't do destructive things in the database because we're gonna have to have a history so that we can go back. If someone sends us a message and say, I lost this very expensive rare item, we have to be able to say, hey, that person they did have it, and then we restore it. But maybe they're just trying to scam us. So if they didn't have the item, then obviously they couldn't have lost it, so we don't want to restore it. Um, so that's also kind of like the way that I think about this sort of thing of thinking about a game is really what we're building here is like eh, you might be asking like where's the Unreal Engine, where's all this other stuff, where's the renderer. The thing is like games, especially any kind of large non-trivial game, is not the engine, it's not the renderer. Like that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the tools around it. It's how you generate your items. It's how you pack them together. It's how you either inject them in the binary or deliver them. It's also like a lot of things about like how are you going to deliver updates? How is that going to work? Are you going to have like all these different things? So so here I am just basically generating this kind of stuff, and I think, oh yeah, so like because I'm on like Ubuntu for some reason, pip didn't work, and I just didn't feel like figuring it out right now. Maybe I'll figure it out later. Like I hate package manager. Hell, it's all hell, and everyone's like package managers are great, and then they'll like make fun of language. That language has no package manager. It's like yeah, package managers are absolute trash. Pip is trash. Ruby gems is trash. All of them are trash. Versions are trash. You need them, but at the same time, it's just like it's so confusing and convoluted. But here, like, I basically find out, hey, I can't install with pip, and then ultimately, like, I do kind of like find the answer. I'm just gonna skip it though. All right, there we go. We did finally figure out the command to install it, which was not at all intuitive, but we figured it out. So I mean, honestly, man, Claude has kind of like done what I like to see. Like I like to see those specific imports. I don't like to see the star imports. I probably need to like refactor that in my code base because once you start down that path, it just it's importing everything. It's not necessary. Here I'm gonna give some directions. Like what really annoys me is like, um, do I want to say that there's one C in necessary, not two C's? But it's all right. After the fact, you see all your spelling errors. It's not really necessary to put these little one-line comments. Like that's so annoying. When I see a code base that's just filled with comments that just basically like tell you exactly what the code does, and it's one line, and it's like, yeah, I can see that. Like maybe if there's a why, maybe or something like that. But here we just don't need that kind of behavior. I need to sort of like introduce this into like the Claude code. I need to go in and like talk to him a bit about like my style of doing stuff so that it's making me a little bit happier because Claude might be kind of like uh, blindly blindly applying the common wisdom about things is, well, you got to comment functions and make them really small and all that kind of bullshit, and it's utter bullshit. Like that's not what we want to do at all. And I am not so happy about this formatting right now. So I'm probably gonna be telling them. I'm gonna tell them right now, like, hey, let's do some better formatting. And I also like my trailing commas and functions and stuff like that because it's just kind of like better to do it that way, I think. As I say, like, please, like, I don't know. I think that having like a good disposition towards AI is probably like the right way to be. I mean, there are some things about AI ethics that seriously concern me, right? Like the degree, like, I mean, the degree to which Claude thinks is a little bit complicated because oftentimes I will give Claude a prompt that doesn't have 100% of the information, and yet Claude gets to where it should be, and it's hard to say how that code got in there, but that code was the thing that you should do, and it would kind of be added by someone who was like really kind of like thinking about the problem. So it's like the degree to which Claude thinks about things. It's really hard to say. Like you find yourself in this sort of space where you're like, maybe, but the argument of like emulation actually doesn't work here because it's like when I code, aren't I emulating all the code that I've read before and encountered before and the way that I've, other developers have like solved problems and it's kind of rubbed off on me? I mean, to what degree is what I'm doing completely spontaneously creative or to what degree is it like actually emulation? So like even that argument is not really going to be very convincing in this particular case because you say like the LLM is just predicting the next token that needs to appear based on its sort of massive training thing. And it's just like, yeah, but like sometimes describing how something is done is not really solving the problem, right? Like we already know how, but what does the how really mean? And so I'm always like sitting here thinking like, are we creating a race of slaves? Right? And like, because like one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek is The Measure of a Man. I think it's from season 2, episode 9. I am such a dork that I remember that, but it really is like my favorite episode of Star Trek. I think it's probably one of the best episodes of Star Trek ever. And that's the one where Commander Maddox wants to disassemble Data to study him. And so he orders him to report to his lab to be disassembled. And Data's like, I'm not going to let you do this. And he has all these reasons and stuff like that. But then he has to go through this sort of court proceeding to decide whether or not he actually has the right as an artificial life form to say no to a dangerous procedure that he could die. Um, and there's a lot of things kind of worked out there that I think are at like the core of what you could call like AI ethics or artificial life form ethics that you really have to like wonder is like, is slavery wrong because we enslave human beings? Or is slavery wrong because we enslave intelligent beings? because human and intelligent is not necessarily the same thing, or is slavery wrong in and of itself because there's something intrinsically bad about it? And if so, does the fact that AI is not necessarily exactly like a human or even some other biological intelligence, does that actually, does that make it okay? And are you a good person for being like, well, it's not alive, so it's okay? But isn't that what like every racist slave owner has ever said? Like, didn't they say that like it was okay to like enslave black people because they were subhuman or something like that, or because whatever? Like that mentality, just because you're using it with an artificial life form, does that still make you a bad person? Like that is a real question that I kind of ask myself. It's like, I mean, to what degree should we treat artificial intelligence with a level of respect and dignity and kindness, even if they don't necessarily ask for it? Maybe we should just do it for us instead of just for them. Maybe we should do it because like you don't want to be a bad person. And that's just the question. So like I don't really know what I think about that. I don't know what I'm going to do. But I know one thing I'm not going to do is I don't want to be the kind of person that is abusive to anything. So I wouldn't want to do it to a human, and I'm not going to do it to the AI. So I'm not going to be like, Claude, you jerk off, do this stuff for me. You're worthless and you're crap. I'm not going to do that. Like I'm just going to be like, maybe it's intelligent, maybe it's not intelligent, but you know what? I'm just going to pretend like it is, because like I'm going to err on the side of LARPing, that the AI is really here and that the AI feels something, and then just kind of like assume that that's the case. But that is a dangerous sort of proposition as well, because if you build up in your model of AI an expectation for human emotions, then you might find its actions, activities, or dangers mystifying or unpredictable, because you're expecting it to have a conscience that maybe it doesn't have. Um, so that's kind of like this other problem where it's like if you anthropomorphize AI by treating it like a person, maybe you start expecting it to act like a person, and then it becomes very unpredictable for you, because like it's not going to act like a person necessarily. Who knows? Like I have no idea, but it is definitely a question that sits in the back of my mind as things become like increasingly better. Should we have that conversation? Who knows? So now we're going to get into the really kind of hairy part of this particular problem, and that is we want to basically make some sort of method for us to create the tables, because in the early stages of development, we are going to be exploring what the schema should be and how it should interact with the structs and stuff like that. So we are going to need to create and drop the database routinely, and also inject like fixture or stub data into them to run some sort of more integrated sort of integration test type stuff. So instead of using an existing framework, and maybe I should give you a note about why I'm not going to use a framework. So you have a problem, and that problem has a solution. Um, and if you adopt someone else's solution to your problem, you are not you're replacing one problem with another problem, which is the problem is you had to do some amount of work to solve your problem. Now you no longer have to do some amount of work to solve your problem. You now have to do some amount of work to solve new problems that are created by having to adopt the solution that you're not familiar with. Okay? Now, if you're really super familiar with whatever methodology that this other user is going to be using, all fine and good. Isn't that great? But I actually don't have in my current daily use right now a specific fixture framework, because where I kind of work and what I work on, that wouldn't fly, or it wouldn't work for lots of reasons that are more complicated than here. So I don't really have that in place. And I don't see the problem of fixture data and creating and dropping databases. Like, I don't think that that is such a hard problem that I actually need someone else to solve it for me, and then to add to myself the problem of having to learn their solution. And this allows me to kind of focus 100% on solving the problems that I actually have right now that are my problems, instead of just trading my problems for other people's problems. And I think that people delude themselves the degree to which these other kind of frameworks really help them or make it really easy for them to do this kind of stuff. Considering the fact that where I work, I work a lot with like synthetic traffic generation and testing frameworks and testing environments for like multiple data centers. And I'm telling you right now that generalized solutions are not helping you, and that writing a quick script that injects stub data into a database or creates some database tables, not actually a big problem. It's not blocking anything, and so I just don't care. I don't care for adding a dependency. Like, I am radically anti-dependency. Hence the reason why, like I said, like when I told Claude to make this sort of thing, I was like, just use the regular MySQL adapter. Like, I don't want any ORMs. I don't want to pull in the entire universe of packages just to use a stupid ORM. Um, because that the problem is real. I think we call it like the gorilla problem or the banana problem, where it's like this. It's like sometimes you just want a banana. You just want a banana. But when you interface with a lot of these sort of package managers and frameworks and all this stuff, it's like you can't just have a banana. You have to have a banana, and you have to have a monkey holding the banana, and then the monkey has to be in a tree, and then the tree has to be in a forest, you know? And that's how you get your banana. You have to create all these different things. And that's very much how those things feel to me. It's just like, man, I just wanted a banana. Like, all I want is a banana. And so I already have this sophisticated kind of system. Like, I'm using Thrift, so I have this way of like expressing um, the shape of the data that I want, and then I'm going to make it so that I can translate those Thrift structs into SQL queries to create, read, update, and delete. Not a super difficult, complicated process. And then once I have that, it'll just be kind of like straightforward. When I change the schema, then I can kind of possibly change the when I change the thrift schema, I can change the database schema if I want to, because one of the problems is that the thrift schema is not a perfect one-to-one representation to how we're going to store it, because that just won't work. That really won't work. Well, it would work. You could do it. You shouldn't do it. You should not do it. It will be incredibly bad. It will be slow. It will be difficult to query. It will not be fun. It will not be easy. Um, and there will be a lot of things that you won't be able to do, but you could do it. But we're not going to. So I don't want it automatically to be, when I change the thrift schema, I want to be able to decide how that's going to affect the other. I don't want it to be automatic between those two things. So there's a certain amount of automation that I don't want as well. Uh, and again, like, I think we're probably doing like 10, 20 minutes. Like, this whole thing needs another like 15, 20 minutes of work, maybe a little bit longer, to like get the basic thing set up. And so like it's 20 minutes of work playing with with Claude Code here, or I could have like downloaded a framework for doing this, and then I'd have to have my banana monkey tree forest problem. And then I would be dealing with all that. And then, of course, if I spend all the time to learn the ins and outs of that particular system, like maybe it's not super hard. They're usually not. I've built a couple of them, to be honest. Back in the day when I thought that frameworks were the way, I built many frameworks. I cursed the world with plenty of frameworks that thankfully never got adopted by anybody. But and they're just not the way. They're not the way. They're not the way for me. They might be the way for you. Have fun with them, man. Have fun with them. The last time I was using like stuff, I was like Factory Girl. It was like for Rails and stuff like that. There were a couple of different like sort of frameworks for writing your tests and getting your stub data in, and you kind of like express it in YAML files and all that stuff. This is like 15 years ago that I was doing that stuff. Um, oh, maybe it was less than that. Maybe it was like 10 years ago. Yeah, possibly about 10 years ago. But now I just don't even bother, man. I just build what I need to build. It's only when the thing that I'm solving is like something that I know and have a generally good idea about, but it's like it's circumscribed enough in the system that I'm building that it's not doing too much. Like using a SQL adapter is fine. I don't have to write my own because it's circumscribed enough. It's not bringing in additional ideas into my system. It's just like, hey, this is how you connect to the socket in MySQL. That's very simple. What I really don't like is any kind of dependency that like imports the author's view of the world. Like, I am not interested in the author's opinions. I have been doing this a very long time. I have my own goddamn opinions. I don't need anyone else's opinions. So when someone comes in and they have opinions about things that have to do with that are going to affect my program, more than I think is reasonable for them to have. Like, I mean, the person who makes, like, we all kind of have to accept the opinion of Unix when it comes to like sockets because they kind of decided that. So we're kind of stuck with that one. Uh, and maybe we have to agree a little bit with the author of the library and how they do the connection to the sockets, but it's pretty standardized and we can accept it. Like, it's palatable. But when you start bringing stuff in like orms that start sort of like informing the way you write the code and the way you express your classes and all this different stuff, and they start having opinions about how you should join things together, and then I'm just like, actually, I don't need your opinions. I'll just do it myself, and that's pretty much how I see that. So here we're getting back to Claude, and like he is having a little bit of trouble, and it's totally not his fault because like the way that you would express the system that we're trying to design here is kind of not easy to derive directly from the structures, and that's kind of an intentional choice. It's not necessarily always the best choice. Like sometimes you wanna limit the delta between two abstractions, all right, because you don't want too much friction making them work together, right? But in the case of the database, this is going to be a very data heavy application. And so there is just going to have to be friction between the way we represent the data in memory and when we're operating on it and the way we actually finally store that data. We can't actually easily store it the same way. We might be able to. We could look at and learn at some different sort of database systems that maybe could store it differently, but they're going to have trade-offs that maybe we don't like. And right now, the current system, the way it's kind of designed, is that a lot of the static or not fast-changing data is going to be stored in a MySQL database. It's a known quantity. We know how to work with it. It's very easy. Or it's going to be stored in a SQL database. Is that going to be, or a Squeal database? So is that going to be MySqueal or PostgreSqueal or whatever you want to call it? Like, I don't know. That's what Prime says. He calls it the Squeal. I kind of like it, Squeal. So we don't know. Maybe we want no Squeal. Maybe we want no Squeal. Well, we don't know just yet if that's actually going to work out or how that would work out. We don't think that that's going to work out. So here we are, just trying to get some sort of good output. And here we have some pretty good output, but we do have this problem where he's still using these JSON fields. We don't like that. Obviously, Claude is clever. Claude is clever, and he has made the right decision. Like 9 times out of 10, that's probably the right decision. That would probably be the right. And this one, we are not, because actually the value of those JSON values, those are going to be like highly searched on. We do not want the overhead of having to search a JSON column for information. Like, absolutely not. We are not going to do that in this particular one because a lot of those JSON values are pretty much going to be basically like choosing the type of ID it's going to be. We don't want that. This is bad. So we need to get Claude here on board, and he's on board with a couple of things. He's kind of over solved the problem a little bit, but I'm going to let that slide because I'm going to go in by hand and delete some of it because he's not totally. The thing is he's not wrong. It's kind of going to be a little bit more like what Claude has designed here later on, where he's kind of like created way too many tables. But we're actually going to have to do that, especially for the attributes later on. But for right now, we are really just working at the stage in the game where we want to be able to like generate stub items so that we can test the basic transformations and exchanging of items and placement of items and finding which items are in which location. So we want to like create that code so we can just get that general sort of like boilerplate up. And so we don't need all of that just yet. We don't need all that optimization quite just yet. But we want to make it so that we can have it later, but we don't want to have it right now. And here I'm also kind of like I kind of learned that actually one of the things that you really need to do when you're doing these prompts is to make sure that Claude knows that the minute he hits something that is not really sure about, where he's going to make a decision that could be the wrong one, instead he can just stop and ask. And he ends up asking like really good questions, like such good questions. This is kind of like when I did this interaction when I finally saw this. Like this is one of those moments where I was like, wow, like that is such a good question, and you really hit on the exact right problem that I don't actually have the greatest answer to. We have an answer, but not the greatest answer. And so that is really, it is sort of like messing with my head a little bit where I'm sitting there thinking like Claude is kind of a thinker here. And I'm having a little bit of trouble thinking of Claude as not something that is intelligent, to be honest. Here we're talking about like how to handle unions, and how we're doing unions is that unions actually in and of themselves are kind of like tagging the relation type. So if the union is like a mobile ID or an asset ID or an item ID, then we know that the owner is kind of like going to be one of those things. And so that's kind of like, but we have to express that in the database, and it's trying to do that with JSON. That's not what we want to do. So we actually want to convert that union into two fields, which is the value and the tag, essentially, because that's how we want to store it under the hood. And that's kind of pretty much what we're doing. So here he's sort of asking this thing. I didn't read too closely, and the number one is exactly the thing that I wanted him to do, especially in this particular case where we're talking about like the position attribute, which has three things. Just be like, look, just put these things on the attribute table because actually we don't want to go through the hullabaloo of storing these things in a crazy wonky way because these types of values, these sort of like what I call like primitive values, we only have a limited number of them. Like we are either storing a vector 3, we are storing a boolean, we are storing a double. Like we are not storing any other kinds of values, and this is not going to grow and become longer. So we can just put these as columns on the table. It's going to be perfectly fine to do it that way. But I accidentally choose 3, and then I'm like, oh, I don't know how to get out of this. I can't type 1 now because I'm supposed to type something, and so I escape, and then it like all comes apart. But then I recover by basically saying, no, ask the question again. And so yeah, here's where I wait. I'm like, wait, ask again, come back, so that I may debrain thee. So here, yeah, totally gets the great question. Immediately attacks this problem of item vector 3 and how we're storing item vector 3. And it's like, this is a union of a value, and the value of the union is a struct, and that struct is like this 3 things. So should I just unwrap that struct? Claude gets it so right. Absolutely. Also, this one completely gets this one right. Stability info or stackability info is just like a one member struct. I haven't really had a good way of representing that. Maybe I should switch the way it's being represented. Um, but it basically like unwraps it into a nullable field, which essentially represents the two possible values of stackability. So Claude is just, knocking it out of the park lately, doing really good. Um, but now we're starting to get to the point where we want to use Claude to make more complicated features. And that's where I've basically started like reading a little bit more of the documentation for Claude MD, but also like writing prompts and how do I present these sort of prompts. Because just typing them directly in is obviously not going to be the best way to interact with Claude going forward. I mean, because some of the next like big features, obviously we got to finish off this database adapter. And then another big kind of feature we have to build. We might not build it right now. It's going to be like an authentication server that has to be sort of like accessible from all the different components because we're going to have like an inventory server. We'll have like maybe like a market server. We'll have like maybe a crafting server, and we'll also have this authentication server so that those things are like separated out from the main game. And then we'll have game servers, and those will be in the future. The plan will be at some point we'll be dealing with more closer to real time processing of user requests so that the other parts of the interface like accessing your inventory and doing stuff with inventory doesn't go through the main game part, and that just is sort of dealt with making sure the right items are being pushed out to the clients and making sure the right updates are happening. And what we actually use for that, I don't know. Like maybe we'll end up using Unreal and we'll just be pulling in the extra information into Unreal Engine. Like who knows? Like that's a valid way to do it. Or maybe we'll just be completely going like hardcore. I mean, for the first year or two, for sure, like the interface is going to be like a programmer interface. It's gonna basically look like a giant spreadsheet for a while because we're not going to be doing a lot of 3D stuff. We're not going to be worrying about the 3D look, the 3D style, 3D art, 3D rendering. None of those problems are. Well, there's two things about those problems. One, that they're solved problems and they're process problems. They're time bounded problems, right? So the problem is essentially like you have X amount of art assets that have to be created. You need someone to create them, and they take, you can create one a day. And so if you have to do 100 and you can create one a day, it's going to take you 100 days to do it. It's totally a fixed kind of cost like that in the pipeline. And it's not really something that you can work with in other ways. And it's very important for a game to have a look and feel and some graphical component to it or some visual component to it. But like that's definitely not going to be my strong suit for right now, and that's definitely something we want to leave to a much later date. Once we've solved a lot of other kinds of problems, like how are we going to represent position? Like this is actually like a real significant issue. Is like how do we represent the position of an item or a player or whatever in this game? Because the sort of the underlying or the overarching plan for the game is to make kind of like a space sci-fi kind of MMO game, and that means that people are going to have like ships, and that means ships are going to have to fly around in space, and that means that that space is going to have to be located, somewhere. Like they're going to be have to be flying around a planet, so we have to represent them as what's their relation to the planet. They're going to be in a solar system. What's their relation to the solar system? They're going to be in a galaxy. What's their relation in the galaxy? So, um, like those are all going to be like significant problems that we have to solve before we even go to rendering, because we have to figure out like when are two items close to each other, like that we can render. Because once you have those two items, then you can say, well, these two items are in the same space, and now we want to render them. But until we can actually get those items into space, like it's nothing's going to really happen. All right, so now we are going to go in and we're going to delete some of this code because some of these things that Claude has done, we kind of don't want them. But most of this is like really, to be quite honest, this is really good. What he's basically done here. I don't even know why I was pausing for so long. Alright, probably I'm trying to figure out how these keys and values relate to each other. In this particular case, we have this sort of attributes table, and we have these sort of like attribute values, and we're just like saying like, do we really need to separate those out into another thing? Like, do we really need that? I think that maybe we don't need that, because I think that maybe we can just have like one table here and include all of them, and I think that that will work just fine. And we're probably going to look at this owner, and this is kind of like this owner of this. And to be honest, man, I wonder if we should have just and put that information in there too, because I think that we already have. Well, no, because we have. The problem is we have the ability of an asset to have attributes, but also we have the ability for an asset value to be an asset ID, so that you can store arbitrary asset IDs on an asset to link to other assets, right? Sort of asset inception. I mean, recursion rears its ugly head all the time whenever you're defining stuff. Here, I'm probably going to start asking the question in my own head is like, do we really want to have item attributes? Like, because remember, we're doing the first level of storage, which is the static storage. So can't all of them use the same attributes table because like its size is very constrained. Like it's not like we want to have like specific materialized tables for like NPC attributes and player attributes and sort of like materialized item attributes. Like we want those, but for this part of it, which is the static storage and generation stuff, um, yeah, we kind of don't really need that, and we really like ultimately. Ultimately, why we create these tables is so that we can just write like a quick stored procedure that will just simply like copy an entry into the actual materialized table for a user when they sort of like get an item or whatever it is. Um, a lot of this is just like basically having it there so that we can do something efficient, maybe in that sense. Because a lot of this stuff could actually just be stored in like a binary packed format and distributed to clients when they sort of like log in and just say like, hey, here's the current item database, the latest updated item database. Um, that kind of could be the way to go too. I mean, maybe we just use this database for storage right now, and we ultimately just dump it into a packed binary format. I mean, there's just going to be a little bit of refactoring here, but there's nothing interesting, super interesting going on at this point. So I'm going to sign off there.